This is video file 1 for a report on a property in number 104, Dorrins Strand, Strandhill, County Sligo. So I'm going to just, this is the introduction and the description here. So the first thing I just want to briefly explain, which is not a defect, but just an explanation. I want to explain the structure of the house, because the house is a timber framed structure. So it's not a concrete blocks. It's not concrete block throughout. It's got a timber framed structure, and it's good to know what it is. So basically, this is a kind of a 3D drawing of what you have, and this is a 3D of the external wall. And basically, so the 3D wall, so the external wall consists of three parts. You've got your load bearing timber frame. This is your timber frame wall from here to here. So those are your timber studs, and it's got a sheathing material, usually OSB board, which is similar to a plywood, holding those boards together. And then you've got plasterboard on the other side, and that's the internal load bearing wall that carries the load of the roof. And then between the external leaf and this timber stud, you've got, you can see it here, a 50mm cavity. This 50mm cavity here is basically, it prevents any rainwater seeping through the building and going right the way through. It hits the cavity, and then it can't go any further because it has no medium to travel through, and then it falls to the bottom of the cavity and should go back out. So the cavity helps the building to stay dry. And then the external leaf here, which is a masonry leaf, it provides the main protection against the weather. So it's not really load bearing, but it's taking most of the protection against the weather. Now, it's shown here in this diagram, it's shown as brickwork, but in your property it's not brickwork, it's actually blockwork, and it's blockwork that's been rendered. So there'll be a 25mm render, a cement render on the outside of that block. Now, one of the reasons I just wanted to show the structure and how the structure works here is because when you have a timber frame in an external wall, the timber frame needs to be ventilated. So the cavity here, this 50mm cavity, needs to be ventilated. And the way that that is ventilated is external, small external little vents are provided in the masonry wall outside. I'll show them later, but they're provided in the external wall to allow air to circulate in this cavity, in this 50mm cavity. And basically what that does is, in case that you get any condensation forming on the inside here in the cavity, or if you get any moisture penetration, that air circulation allows that moisture to evaporate and prevents deterioration of the timbers. So basically, wherever you have timber in your structure, you will need to have those vents, because they will help the timber to dry out and prevent deterioration. If the internal leaf was the same as the external leaf, if it was masonry, and that's a more common method of construction, to have an internal masonry leaf, and then a cavity, and then an external masonry leaf, i.e. two masonry leaves, those vents would not be necessary, and you wouldn't see those vents because there's no timber, so you don't need to worry about it. But the fact that those vents are there, it's one way that I know from looking at the property straight away that it's a timber frame structure. And timber frame structures are sound. They're not inherently prone to problems. They've been extensively used over the last 20 years. They're fine, and they just work a little bit differently. So the timber has to be ventilated in order to keep it maintained and to make sure that it doesn't deteriorate. So that's your 3D view of your external leaf. So this is a more substantial view of your structure, and just fully labeled there if you want to go through and just read through it just to see. There's your, all of this structure here is your internal leaf. That's your internal leaf. Your insulation fits between your joists. You can see it back here. The insulation is between the two joists. So the insulation does not go in the cavity because there's no space for it. And then that timber structure has a sheathing material and then a membrane. Then there's a cavity. You can see the 50mm cavity there. And then after that 50mm cavity, you have your external masonry leaf. Again, the masonry here is shown in brickwork, but in your property it's actually not brickwork, it is masonry, and that masonry leaf is tied to the internal leaf. Those leaves are tied together. You can see the two, they're not completely independent. They do work together, and they do work together to resist the wind loads, sideways wind loads. Those are the ties there. The ties are fixed to the timber frame, screwed to the timber frame, and then the masonry is built around them. So that's what your structure looks like. Now I've included, those are 3D structures there to give you an idea. So this is again just to show you what a timber frame looks like. That's a two-dimensional cross-sectional view. So you have your internal timber stud-work here, and that's actually the insulation that's shown there between the studs. You have your cavity, 50mm cavity, and then your external leaf, again shown in brickwork, but yours isn't brickwork, yours is actually masonry. So that's what your roof detail would look like. And at the ground floor, that's what your that's typically what your structure will look like. Here it's shown correctly in that you've shown masonry. This blue here is DPC here, damp-proof course, and that damp-proof course stops rising damp. It's basically a plastic membrane. It stops rising damp going through the wall. The cavity stops dampness penetrating through, because any dampness that penetrates through will drop down and should get pushed back out. That's the way your structure works. This red is the radon barrier, and you're in a radon area, so a radon barrier has been installed, and that's the radon sump. I did show you the radon sump on the slide. That's the radon pipe work there coming out, and if at a later date you find that you need to connect up the radon sump, then it's there to be connected up. Now, so there again, that's your timber frame structure. Now, the one thing here, this is here, you can see here, this is just another view of another, like a cross section through a timber frame, and you see here they've shown proprietary perp end vents. So this is the perp end vent here. Now that's, I'll show you a better diagram later on, but this is your perpendicular vent here. And your perpendicular vent, that allows air to circulate into the cavity and to flow up and out another perpendicular vent at a higher level. So this here allows air to circulate in the cavity, so that if any moisture does get in and finds its way into the cavity, or if any condensation forms, this allows air to circulate. And the reason I'm making a point of pointing out the perpendicular vents and how they work is because in your property somebody has painted over those vents, which is not a good idea. They should be cleaned out to allow air to circulate in the cavity to prevent any kind of damage. So now it should not affect the this part of the structure, the internal leaf, that's where the insulation is. So the fact that air circulates in here, it's not going to affect the insulation, and the air tightness membrane will be along here. So as long as the air tightness membrane along here is done correctly, having air circulate in this cavity won't mean that you're getting air circulation into the house. So there is some work that needs to be done on your property to clean those vents. So that's why I'm kind of making a point of just pointing it out. Now, the next thing I'm going to point out to you is, and and I'm just going to briefly run through it. I did look online on Sligo County Council's website, and they hold planning, like the drawings, the planning files, they hold them there. And anything built generally after the year 2000, they have digital records. So I was able to go online and I was able to find digital records for your development. Your number 104 is shown as a house type F. There's the planning file number there, and I've included just some of the sketches just to show you what's there. Now, this is the ground floor plan. Now, you might look at this and say, well, no, I can hardly see anything there. It is a very poor quality. They scan in the drawings and they don't scan them into a very high resolution. It's really just just to kind of show you what they have. But if you want to take a good look at the drawings, then you would really have to go and visit the council and take a look at the planning file, and you can, and they will have drawings that are there that are fairly high resolution that you can use. For example, if you want to go and do any work on the property in future, they have a full set of drawings there that would enable you to, well, paper drawings anyway. They have drawings on paper that would enable you to, let's say if you're building an extension or doing any work on it, it would be helpful for you to know what you have in order to get prices, to get work done. So I'm just really kind of including this for the sake of completeness, that there are planning drawings there, and these are extracts from them. That's your ground floor plan, that's your first floor plan, your roof plan, your front elevation. Again, they're very poor quality, but you can get better quality when you go in. These are your side elevations, your rear elevation. That's a cross section through the building showing, you've got prefabricated timber trusses, timber fink trusses, and then there's your external cavity wall, which is wide, 300 wide. Your internal walls are not so wide, and that's just a typical foundation of what you have. It's very difficult to see anything on this drawing because it's not. That's another cross section. Well, this cross section is front to back, and this cross section is through both properties, from the chimney to the chimney, showing roughly what you have. I included there, that's the details of the architect. So if at any stage you wanted to get a digital copy of your drawings for your house, then Taylor Architects should have your drawings there. So if you contact them, I'm sure that they charge you a slight fee, but they'd be able to provide a full set of drawings for your property if you wanted them. Now, this is an extract from landdirect.ie. I always include this just as a matter of course. Landdirect.ie, this is when a property is sold, it just shows the outline of the property, the folio number, the plan number, and I always just include it just to have a look and see if there's any anomalies. I did not see any anomalies. Everything looks fine. That's your property there, number 104, and that's a blow up of the details that they have. The area was not available, but everything looks fine. So before I start actually talking about the specifics of your property, that's the next section. I'll go through the observations. I'll just go through the synopsis here. So the synopsis here is that I go through quite a list of defects because I spent the full day on site. But if I was just to give you a comparison of your property compared to other properties on the market, I would have said your property is in good condition. It's above average, which is 2 steps above average. So if I was to compare your property, to another 100 similar properties, you might find that your property is, in the top 70 to 80%. So it's in good condition, and there were very few problems really that I noticed. So I'm going to stop this video here because it's gotten a bit long, and the second video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the observations specifically related to your property. I'll start off first of all with the vents, the problem with the vents, and I'm going to stop this video here.